I'm Major Alexandra Valkyrie 6 Dawson, 33, and I built my career one mission at a time, no shortcuts, no noise, just work. For years, I gave everything I had to the service. Late nights, missed holidays, every ounce of loyalty I owned. But when the institution I bled for quietly erased my contributions and handed my work to someone else, I made a decision that changed the course of my life. Ever been overlooked, dismissed, or blindsided by someone or something you devoted yourself to? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're in good company. Before I get into what happened, drop where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your ground after being pushed aside, hit like and subscribe. What came next, even I didn't see it coming. I sit in the corner booth at the tailhook, back against the wall, eyes on the exits. It's habit now, muscle memory from years of briefings where threat assessment wasn't theoretical. The bar smells like salt air and decades of spilled beer, wood polish failing to cover the scent of time. I'm in civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a fitted jacket, nothing that screams military. I've been at NAS North Island all week for joint operations briefings, the kind where I sit in rooms full of people implementing doctrine I wrote 5 years ago. They don't know that, of course. The PowerPoint slides don't include author credits. The door swings open and a group of junior officers spills in, flight jackets still on even though they're indoors, that particular swagger that comes from being 20-something and convinced the world runs on your fuel. Navy lieutenants, most of them, maybe one lieutenant junior grade trying to keep up. They're loud in the way people are when they want to be noticed, voices carrying across the room about hop times and simulator scores. I take a sip of my beer and look back at my phone, scrolling through emails I'll answer later. One of them, tall, dark hair, the kind of jaw that probably got him through his first few fitness reports on charm alone, spots the booth. He breaks from his group and walks over. His boot hits the leg of my chair, not hard, but deliberate. "This booth's for legends only," he says, gesturing with his beer toward the open tables near the bar. "Civilians over there." I look up at him, keeping my face neutral. He's got lieutenant bars on his khakis, and his name tape reads Keller. His tone isn't hostile exactly, just entitled, the kind of confidence that hasn't been tested yet, hasn't learned that bravado without discipline is just noise. "I'm fine here," I say, voice even. He doesn't even register the words, just waves his hand like he's shooing a stray dog. "Ma'am, seriously. Legends only. It's tradition." I've seen this pattern before, not just here, but at Nellis, at Langley, at every joint base I've visited in the last 18 months. Younger officers obsessed with callsign culture, treating it like mythology instead of what it actually is, a marker of missions flown, risks taken, people brought home. They know the stories, they grew up on documentaries about operations we risked everything for, but they don't understand the weight. They think respect is inherited through proximity, that standing in the same bar where legends drank makes them legendary by association. "Civilian," he says again, and this time there's a note of impatience. I set my beer down and point to the wooden beam above the booth. The wood is dark with age and carved with names, call signs, mostly, some with dates, some without. It's a history written in knives and pride, each name a story someone else would have to tell. One name, carved deeper than the others, reads Valkyrie 6. "That's mine," I say. Keller leans in, squints at the carving. His expression changes in stages, confusion, then recognition, then something close to shock. The color drains from his face. He straightens up fast, nearly stumbles back a step. The bar gets quieter. Not silent, but the noise level drops as heads turn. Someone at the next table whispers something I don't catch, and one of Keller's friends moves closer to look at the beam. This is the moment I've been noticing everywhere, the crack I can't ignore anymore. It's not that they don't respect the history, it's that they don't connect it to living people. The names on the wall are myths, ghosts, stories from another era. They don't expect those ghosts to be sitting here in civilian clothes, drinking a beer at 1800 hours on a Thursday. They've turned us into folklore, and folklore doesn't talk back. Keller's still staring at the name. "Ma'am," I shake my head. "It's fine. Sit. Your friends are waiting." He doesn't move. His buddies are watching now, a mix of curiosity and secondhand embarrassment on their faces. One of them, a woman with lieutenant junior grade bars, steps forward. Her eyes go from the beam to me and back again. Valkyrie 6, she says quietly, like she's testing the words. You coordinated the Horizon extraction. I don't answer that. The Horizon extraction is classified at levels these kids don't have access to, and even if it weren't, I don't talk about it. Not here, not with strangers who learned about it from sanitized after-action reports. Keller finds his voice again. I didn't know, I didn't realize, it's fine, I say again, and this time I mean it. You didn't know. That's the problem. He frowns, not understanding. I don't elaborate. How do I explain that his ignorance isn't personal, it's systemic? That somewhere in the last decade, the institution I gave my youth to decided that history was something you referenced in PowerPoints, not something you learned from the people who made it? That the names carved into this beam aren't decorations, they're people, and most of us are still here, still serving, still watching while our work gets reassigned and our contributions get erased from official narratives? I can't say that. Not here, not to him. So I just pick up my beer and take another sip. Keller and his friends back away, finding seats at a different table. They keep glancing over, whispering. The LTJG pulls out her phone, probably looking something up. I wonder what she'll find, maybe a mention in a declassified report, maybe a photo from a joint operations ceremony 5 years ago. Maybe nothing at all. This isn't betrayal yet. That comes later, in different rooms with different people. But it's the early warning sign, the tremor before the quake. I'm sitting in a bar where my name is carved into history, and the people who worship that history didn't recognize me when I was right in front of them. I finish my beer and signal the bartender for another. The evening is young, and the weight of being forgotten by the world you built doesn't get lighter with time. It just gets more familiar. I've learned to sit with it, this distance between who I was and who the institution remembers. I've learned that respect, real respect, isn't maintained by systems or titles. It's earned in the lives you touch, the missions you shape, and the quiet moments when truth reasserts itself. But tonight, in this booth, surrounded by younger officers who finally understand who's sitting among them, I'm just tired. Tired of being a ghost in my own story. The bartender brings my beer. I thank him and settle back against the wall, eyes on the exits, always watching. Some habits you never break. 2 years before the bar, I sat in a conference room at Peterson Space Force Base, waiting for a promotion board decision that should have been routine. My file was clean, no disciplinary actions, no failed inspections, nothing but solid performance reviews and a stack of commendations that read like a highlight reel. I'd been a major for 3 years, in the zone for lieutenant colonel, and every metric said I was ready. The board took 40 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall, second-hand sweeping circles, while my career hung in balance. When they called me back in, I knew something was wrong. You develop a sense for it after enough years. The way people won't meet your eyes, the careful neutrality of their expressions. Major Dawson, the board president said. He was a full colonel, silver eagles gleaming on his shoulders, face worn in the particular way that comes from decades of making hard calls. We've reviewed your package thoroughly. I stood at attention, hands behind my back, waiting. Your operational record is exemplary, he continued. Your performance has consistently exceeded standards. However, the board has determined that at this time, command track assignment is not appropriate for your career progression. The words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. Not appropriate. No explanation, no specific deficiency, just a polite phrase that meant door closed. Sir, may I ask for clarification on the decision factors? The board's deliberations are confidential, Major. You'll receive written feedback through your chain of command. I never received that written feedback. What I received instead, 3 weeks later, was a new assignment, advisory role, joint task coordination, the kind of position that sounds important in a promotion packet, but means you're being moved sideways instead of up. I took it because you don't fight promotion boards, not if you want any career left to salvage. The real knife came 6 months later. I was sitting in my office at 0730, working through a tactical assessment for an upcoming joint exercise, when Captain Ryan Mercer knocked on my open door. Mercer had been on my crew for 4 years, solid officer, the kind of person you wanted in the cockpit when everything went wrong. Ma'am, did you see the morning brief? I hadn't. I pulled it up on my screen while he stood there, shifting his weight foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. The brief was standard format, operations updates, personnel changes, upcoming exercises. Halfway down the page, a highlighted section, New Doctrine Implementation for Multi-Domain Coordination. I read it twice before the implications sank in. The doctrine being implemented was mine. I'd spent 18 months developing it, refining it, testing it in simulation and live exercises. I presented it to 3 different commands, revised it based on feedback from operators who'd actually fly the missions. My fingerprints were on every page, every decision matrix, every contingency plan. My name appeared nowhere in the brief. Instead, it was credited to the Joint Operations Development Team, with Lieutenant Colonel Evan Rourke listed as primary architect. Rourke, the new deputy commander who'd been fast-tracked through promotion boards, politically connected, the kind of officer who looked good in front of cameras and knew exactly how to position himself for the next rank. He'd arrived at the base 8 months ago, sat in on 2 of my final briefings about the doctrine, asked a handful of questions, and apparently decided that proximity to good work was the same as doing it. Ma'am? Mercer's voice pulled me back. I know you developed most of that framework. We all do. It's fine, I said automatically, even though it wasn't. It's not right. Captain, drop it. He left, but the damage was done. I sat there staring at the brief, watching my work, my mission, my risk, my years of expertise get reassigned to someone else's career narrative. In the military, credit matters. It's how you prove value, how you build a case for promotion, how you establish authority. Without credit, you're just executing someone else's vision, even when that vision was yours to begin with. I didn't fight it. Professionally, I acknowledged the doctrine implementation, attended the coordination meetings, answered technical questions when asked. But privately, in the space between heartbeats where you admit truths you can't say aloud, it felt like being erased from my own history. The institution I'd given 15 years to, the Air Force that had shaped me from a 22-year-old second lieutenant into a field-grade officer with operational command experience, had decided my contributions were transferable assets, resources to be reallocated without attribution. That was the betrayal. Not a person, though Rourke was certainly complicit. Not a single decision, though the promotion board rejection stung. It was the system itself, the machinery of career management and political positioning that had quietly determined I was more useful as a source of expertise than as a leader in my own right. I started noticing the pattern everywhere after that. Meetings where I wasn't consulted even though I'd written the tactics being discussed. Junior officers quoting doctrine I'd authored without knowing I was in the room. Invitations to panels and symposiums where I'd present technical details while someone else got the command position. Recognition plaques arriving with wrong names engraved. Bureaucratic errors that somehow always flowed in one direction. 3 months after the doctrine reassignment, I ran into Rourke in the hallway outside the command section. He was in flight suit just back from a VIP orientation flight, the kind of public relations mission that looked good in photos. Alex, he said, using my first name without permission. Good work on the exercise planning. Really solid stuff. I stopped walking. Thank you, sir. You know, we should grab coffee sometime. I'd love to pick your brain about some operational concepts I'm developing. Operational concepts he was developing. My operational concepts, rebranded and repackaged, already being positioned for his next promotion board. I'll check my schedule, sir. I never checked my schedule. I never grabbed coffee. I just watched while my work became his career trajectory, understanding with cold clarity that the system I trusted had never trusted me the same way. That night I sat in base housing, alone, staring at the shadow box on my wall. Medals, ribbons, the folded flag from my father's funeral, all the markers of service and sacrifice. My phone sat silent on the counter. No missed calls, no check-ins from mentors who'd once promised to look out for me. The institution had moved on. I was 31 years old, a major with a spotless record, and no clear path forward. The Air Force wasn't my job anymore. It hadn't been for years. It was my identity, my stability, the framework that gave my life structure and meaning. And it had quietly, bureaucratically, decided I was expendable. The lieutenant at the bar thinking I'm just a civilian would be funny if it weren't so precisely accurate. I'd been made civilian in everything but rank, pushed to the margins of my own service, rendered invisible by the same system that had once made me Valkyrie 6. But that night, sitting alone with my medals and my silence, I didn't know how to fight back. I just knew something had broken that wouldn't heal the way it was supposed to. The call sign came during my third deployment, when I was a captain with 4 years of operational experience and a reputation for staying calm when everything else was falling apart. We were running a high-risk coordination mission, 6 aircraft from 3 different services attempting a personnel extraction in weather that should have grounded us. The mission commander had called it off twice already, but the window was closing and the team on the ground was running out of time. I'd started as a second lieutenant fresh out of ROTC at 22, commissioned with a degree in aerospace engineering, and absolutely no idea what I was walking into. The Air Force wasn't a career choice born from family tradition or childhood dreams of flying. It was practical stability, direction, a way to pay off student loans while doing something that mattered. My father had been Army, enlisted, deployed 3 times before an IED in Kandahar made him a folded flag and a line in a casualty report. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat after that. The military wasn't romantic to me. It was real and it was necessary, and I understood the cost. Pilot training was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not the flying. I was good at that, better than good once I stopped overthinking the physics and trusted my instincts. It was the culture, the constant evaluation, the awareness that every mistake was recorded and every success was measured against people who'd been dreaming of cockpits since they were 6 years old. I wasn't the best pilot in my class. I was the best at staying focused when the best pilot started making errors under pressure. My first deployment as a first lieutenant taught me that leadership in combat isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about keeping everyone else alive long enough to be smart together. I made mistakes. Delayed a decision that cost us mission time, trusted a maintenance report that turned out to be optimistic, almost lost a crew member to dehydration because I didn't enforce hydration protocols strongly enough. But I learned. I listened to my NCOs, the master sergeants and senior master sergeants who'd forgotten more about operations than I'd ever know. I stayed late in operations centers, studying weather patterns and fuel calculations and enemy air defense systems until the knowledge became instinct. The mission that earned me Valkyrie 6 happened on a Tuesday at 0400 hours. We had 6 aircraft, 2 Air Force, 3 Navy, 1 Marine Corps helicopter, trying to extract a joint reconnaissance team from a hot zone where the weather had turned from marginal to catastrophic. Wind shear, low visibility, communications interference from the terrain. The mission commander was a Navy commander, competent but conventional, and he'd made the call to abort when the first helicopter reported turbulence that exceeded safety margins. I was in the command center, watching the feeds, doing the math in my head. The team on the ground had maybe 3 hours before enemy forces would locate them. The weather would clear in 90 minutes according to the meteorological models, but those models had been wrong before. Aborting meant leaving people behind. Proceeding meant risking 8 aircraft and their crews. "Sir," I said to the commander, keeping my voice level. "Request permission to speak." He looked at me. I was still a captain then, junior to most people in the room, and nodded. "The weather's clearing from the west," I said. "If we adjust the approach vector and stagger the timing, we can use the terrain to shield from the worst of the wind shear. The first aircraft rides the edge of the clearing weather, establishes the safety margin, and signals the rest. Sequential insertion instead of simultaneous." "That's not protocol, Captain." "No, sir. But protocol assumes consistent weather conditions. We don't have that." He studied the weather maps, then looked at me. "You're confident in this assessment?" I wasn't. Not entirely. But confidence wasn't the same as certainty, and sometimes you had to act on incomplete information because waiting for complete information meant people died. "Yes, sir." He authorized it. I coordinated the 6 aircraft, different services, different communication protocols, different risk tolerances, and kept them synchronized as we threaded through gaps in the weather that appeared and disappeared like doors opening and closing. The first helicopter made it through, established the corridor, and the rest followed. We pulled the reconnaissance team out with 15 minutes to spare before enemy forces arrived at the extraction point. When we landed, one of the helicopter pilots, a Marine captain with 20 years of flight time, walked up to me in the hangar. "You just kept 6 birds in the air through conditions that should have scattered us," he said. "You're the Valkyrie now. 6 aircraft, 6 safe returns. Valkyrie 6. The name stuck. Not because I asked for it, but because it represented something real. A mission where the math worked and the risk paid off and everyone came home. It became part of my identity, the marker that said I could be trusted with hard decisions. The Air Force became more than stability after that. It became family in the way organizations become family when you've bled together, literally or figuratively. The mentors who invested time teaching me tactical planning at 200 hours when they could have been sleeping. The younger officers who looked at me with respect I never took lightly because I remembered being on the other side of that respect, desperate to prove I belonged. The crew chiefs and loadmasters and logistics specialists who made every mission possible and never got enough credit for it. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, funerals. I spent Christmases in temporary quarters on bases whose names I had to look up. I ended a relationship with someone I might have loved because he needed someone who could be present, and I needed to be 6,000 miles away coordinating operations that wouldn't appear in any newspaper. All of that sacrifice made sense because I believed in the institution. I believed that merit mattered, that good work would be recognized, that the people who'd mentored me would continue mentoring the next generation. I believed the Air Force valued substance over appearance, expertise over politics, dedication over convenience. I believed that right up until the moment I realized I was wrong. The betrayal hurt worse because of everything I'd given. If the Air Force had been just a job, losing credit for my work would have been annoying but survivable. But it wasn't a job. It was my identity, my purpose, the framework that organized my entire life. And when that framework decided I was expendable, it wasn't just a professional setback. It was existential erasure. Sitting in the bar 2 years later, being called a civilian by an officer who'd grown up hearing stories about Valkyrie 6 without connecting that call sign to a living person, I understood something I'd been avoiding. The institution I'd served wasn't the institution that existed anymore. Maybe it never had been. Maybe I'd just been useful enough that the gap between my ideals and reality hadn't mattered until it did. The bourbon burned going down, and I ordered another. The bartender didn't ask questions. He'd seen enough military personnel in this bar to recognize the look, the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing through illusions you'd spent years maintaining. Mercer found me later that night, sliding into the booth without asking permission. He'd aged since I'd first met him. Lines around his eyes, gray starting at his temples. Still a captain, still waiting for a promotion board that might never come. Saw Keller's group giving you space, he said. Word travels. Always does. You okay? I considered the question. Was I okay? By what metric? I was functional, sober enough, professionally competent. But okay implied a wholeness I hadn't felt in months. I'm here, I said, which was the most honest answer I could give. Mercer nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. We sat in silence for a while, watching junior officers try to impress each other with stories that would sound different 10 years from now, after the shine wore off and the reality set in. For what it's worth, Mercer said eventually, we all know whose doctrine that really is. Work's presenting it, but everyone who matters knows you built it. Everyone who matters isn't on promotion boards. No, he agreed. They're not. That was the problem, the structural flaw that couldn't be fixed by individual awareness. The people who knew the truth weren't the people making decisions. And the people making decisions cared more about optics than operations, more about career trajectories than tactical expertise. I finished my drink and stood up. Thanks for checking in, Ryan. Anytime, ma'am. I left the bar at 2200 hours, walking back to base housing through streets that smelled like salt and jet fuel. Somewhere overhead, aircraft were conducting night operations, running the same training missions we'd refined years ago. The sound was familiar, almost comforting, proof that the work continued even when individual contributors got lost in the shuffle. The Air Force didn't need me to function. It had absorbed my expertise, integrated my innovations, and moved on. I was replaceable, had always been replaceable, and the painful revelation wasn't that I'd been replaced, but that I'd believed I wouldn't be. But walking those streets in the dark, I felt something shifting. Not acceptance, I wasn't ready for that. But recognition, maybe. A cold acknowledgement that if the institution wouldn't value my contributions on its own terms, I'd have to establish value on mine. I didn't know what that looked like yet, but I knew I was done chasing validation from systems designed to withhold it. The first sign that something had shifted came during a routine planning meeting 6 weeks after the doctrine reassignment. Lieutenant Colonel Rourke was presenting updates on implementation. My implementation, his presentation, when a colonel from Air Combat Command asked a technical question about integration protocols. Rourke hesitated. Just a beat, just long enough that people noticed. I'll need to verify the specific parameters, he said smoothly. The colonel, a woman named Patricia Voss with 30 years of operational experience, looked at him over her reading glasses. Major Dawson's here. She can probably answer that. The room went quiet. I'd been sitting in the back, taking notes, not expecting to be called on. Rourke's expression didn't change, but something in his posture tightened. Ma'am, I said, standing. The integration protocol uses a layered authentication system. Primary authentication through existing command channels, secondary verification through automated cross-checks, and a tertiary manual review for high-stakes operations. The manual review requirement is what makes it different from previous doctrine. It builds in a human decision point that can't be overridden by automated systems. Colonel Voss nodded. Because automated systems failed in the Kadena incident. Yes, ma'am. The doctrine incorporates lessons from that failure. Good work, Major. I sat back down. Rourke continued his presentation, but something had changed in the room. People were looking at me differently, not with hostility toward Rourke, but with awareness. The colonel's question hadn't been innocent. She'd known I could answer it. She'd been making a point. After the meeting, she caught me in the hallway. Walk with me, Major. I fell into step beside her. She didn't speak until we were outside, away from listening ears. I've been in this Air Force for 32 years, she said. I've watched a lot of good officers get sidelined because they were too competent to be convenient. You're not the first, won't be the last. Ma'am. Let me finish. Rourke's playing a political game. He's good at it, I'll give him that. But politics only work when everyone plays along. You stop playing, you change the dynamic. With respect, ma'am, I can't fight him directly. He's my superior officer. I'm not suggesting you fight him. I'm suggesting you stop trying to work within his framework. Do your job, answer questions when asked, but stop making it easy for him to take credit. Let people see who actually knows this material. She left me standing there, processing the implications. It wasn't a call to insubordination. She was too professional for that. It was permission to establish boundaries, to stop volunteering information that would be repackaged without attribution. I started implementing her advice immediately. When Rourke scheduled meetings to discuss operational concepts, I politely declined, citing workload constraints. When he sent emails requesting detailed technical explanations, I provided references to documentation instead of writing lengthy responses he could repurpose. When junior officers came to me with questions, I answered them fully, but I didn't copy Rourke on those conversations anymore. The change was subtle but effective. Within 3 months, there was a growing awareness that Rourke could present the doctrine beautifully but couldn't answer detailed questions about its implementation. He started looking less authoritative in high-level meetings, more dependent on prepared remarks. The backlash came predictably. He called me into his office on a Friday afternoon at 1500 hours, door closed, his expression carefully controlled. Major Dawson, I wanted to discuss your recent engagement with the planning team. Sir, I've noticed you've been less responsive to coordination requests, less engaged with collaborative development. I kept my voice neutral. I've been focused on my assigned duties, sir. My performance reviews indicate I'm meeting all standards. Meeting standards isn't the issue. I'm concerned about your team player mentality. There it was, the implication that setting boundaries was unprofessional, that protecting my work was somehow failing the team. Sir, I'm happy to support mission requirements through appropriate channels. If you have specific concerns about my performance, I'm ready to address them through formal counseling. His jaw tightened. Formal counseling would create documentation, a paper trail that could be reviewed by promotion boards. He didn't want that. I'm not talking about formal counseling. I'm talking about your attitude. My attitude, sir, is professional. I perform my duties, answer questions when asked, and maintain appropriate boundaries. If that's insufficient, please provide specific guidance on what needs to change. He stared at me for a long moment. I'd given him nothing to work with, no emotional response, no defensive arguments, just calm professionalism that couldn't be labeled as insubordination. You're dismissed, Major. I left his office, knowing I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. He tried to intimidate me into compliance, and I'd refuse to comply. The consequences would follow: subtle and bureaucratic, unfavorable duty assignments, missed opportunities for high-visibility projects, the slow erosion of career prospects that happened when someone in leadership decided you were difficult. But something had shifted in me. I wasn't afraid of those consequences anymore. The worst had already happened. My work had been stolen, my advancement blocked, my contributions erased. What else could they take? That weekend, I sat in my quarters and wrote a detailed memo documenting my role in the doctrine development. Not for publication, not for filing complaints, just for the record. Names, dates, meetings, email chains. If anyone ever asked, I'd have proof. But I wasn't counting on anyone asking. Monday morning, I received an email from a joint task group requesting support for an upcoming exercise. The task group commander was a Marine colonel I'd worked with years earlier during a joint training operation. The message was brief. Need your expertise on multi-domain coordination. Temporary advisory role, 6 weeks, excellent visibility. Interested. I accepted before fully considering the implications. 6 weeks away from Rourke's command, working directly with senior officers who valued expertise over politics. It wasn't a promotion, wasn't even a permanent position, but it was space to breathe. The task group assignment changed everything. I was working with people who'd specifically requested my participation, who understood what I brought to the table. The Marine colonel introduced me in the first planning meeting as the architect of the coordination doctrine we're implementing, and no one corrected him because he was the ranking officer in the room. For 6 weeks, I did work that mattered. I answered questions, solved problems, refined procedures based on operational feedback. Officers from all services sought me out for guidance. My inbox filled with requests for consultation. The work itself, the actual substance of coordination and planning, was recognized and valued. When I returned to my regular assignment, something had changed. I wasn't returning as a sidelined major hoping for scraps of recognition. I was returning as someone with demonstrated expertise and growing professional connections outside Rourke's sphere of influence. He noticed immediately, called me into his office again, this time with a different energy, less threatening, more uncertain. Major Dawson, I understand the task group assignment went well. Yes, sir. Productive 6 weeks. I've been thinking about our previous conversation. I may have been unclear about my expectations. He was trying to repair the relationship, I realized. Not because he regretted his behavior, but because my increased visibility made me less easy to marginalize. Sir, I appreciate that. I'm committed to performing my duties professionally and effectively. Of course. I'd like to schedule some time to discuss how we can better integrate your expertise with ongoing operations. I'll check my schedule, sir. I never checked my schedule, but I also didn't need to. The tables had shifted just enough that he couldn't ignore me anymore, and I no longer needed his approval to do meaningful work. It wasn't victory, not yet. But it was movement, the first real movement I'd felt in 2 years. I'd stopped trying to fit into the space that had pushed me out and started building space where my experience naturally mattered. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It was incremental, bureaucratic, the slow accumulation of professional connections and demonstrated competence. But it was real, and it was mine. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 07:15. Subject line: Reconnection. Sender: Lieutenant Call Evan Rourke. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it, coffee going cold in my hand. Major Dawson, I wanted to reach out personally regarding our working relationship. I think there may have been some miscommunication over the past several months, and I'd like the opportunity to discuss how we can move forward more effectively. I value your expertise and believe we can accomplish more working together than at cross purposes. Would you be available for coffee this week? Regards, Evan, first names in the sign-off. The careful phrasing about miscommunication, implying mutual fault when the fault had been entirely one-sided. The appeal to collaboration after months of taking credit for my work. I didn't respond immediately. Didn't delete it, didn't fire off an angry reply, just let it sit in my inbox while I processed what it represented. Rourke was feeling pressure. That much was clear. The task group assignment had raised my visibility, and his inability to answer detailed technical questions had become noticeable enough that senior leadership was asking why the supposed architect of the doctrine seemed unfamiliar with its implementation details. He needed to repair the relationship, Not for my benefit, but for his. I finished my coffee and started working through the day's priorities. Flight scheduling reviews, maintenance coordination, budget projections. The email sat there, unread according to his tracking, a deliberate silence that communicated more than words could. 3 days later, another email, Major Dawson, following up on my previous message. I think it would be beneficial for both of us to sit down and clear the air. Let me know what works for your schedule. Still polite, still careful, but with an edge of impatience creeping in. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by officers junior to him. I replied that afternoon, Sir, my schedule is quite full with current project demands, but I appreciate the outreach. I remain committed to professional performance of all assigned duties. Respectfully, Major Alexander Dawson, Professional. Distant. The message was clear. I would do my job, but I wouldn't pretend the past 2 years hadn't happened. I wouldn't make it easy for him to paper over his behavior with a friendly conversation that absolved him of responsibility. He started showing up in spaces where I worked. Not obviously, not in ways that could be called harassment, just present. He'd walk through the operations center when I was coordinating with other units. He'd attend meetings I was leading sitting in the back, taking notes. He'd linger near my conversations with other officers, close enough to listen but not close enough to participate. Ghost contact, some people called it. The hovering presence of someone who wanted back into your orbit, but hadn't been invited. It was unsettling in a way that couldn't be formally complained about because he wasn't doing anything wrong, just being present in shared professional spaces. Captain Mercer noticed. Ma'am, is Rourke following you? He's trying to reconnect, I said. I'm not making it easy. Good. Let him work for it. But I wasn't sure I wanted him to work for it. The question wasn't whether he could rebuild the relationship, it was whether I wanted any relationship with him at all beyond the bare minimum required by military hierarchy. 2 weeks after the first email, I saw him in the hallway outside the command section. He was talking with a group of junior officers, and I could have walked past, but something made me stop. Sir, I said, acknowledging him. He looked up, surprised-eyed, initiated contact. Major Dawson. How's your week going? Productive, sir. The junior officer sensed the tension and found reasons to disperse. We stood there alone, the hallway suddenly quiet. I meant what I said in my emails, he said. I'd like to talk. Clear some things up. Sir, with respect, I'm not sure what there is to clear up. You reassigned credit for work I developed. You blocked my advancement. You attempted to pressure me into continued collaboration without attribution. Those are facts, not miscommunications. His expression tightened. That's not how I saw the situation. I know. That's the problem. You're being unreasonable. No, sir. I'm being clear. I will perform my duties professionally. I will answer questions when asked. But I will not provide you with unrestricted access to my expertise so you can continue building your career on my work. That's a boundary, not unreasonableness. He stared at me, and I saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. He could push this, could make my life difficult through official channels. But doing so would draw attention to why I was setting boundaries in the first place, and that attention wouldn't serve him well. I see, he said finally. Well, if you change your mind, my door is open. Understood, sir. I walked away feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Agency. Not power. I was still a major, still junior to him, still operating within constraints. But agency, the ability to make choices about how I engaged with people who'd harmed me. The ghost contact continued for weeks. He'd send occasional emails about coordination topics that didn't require my input. He'd mention my name in meetings where I wasn't present, trying to associate himself with my work through proximity. He'd stop by the operations center and attempt small talk that I'd deflect with professional brevity. I stayed polite, stayed civil, stayed clear. Colonel Voss caught me after a joint planning session. I see Rourke's trying to get back in your good graces. Yes, ma'am. You holding firm? Yes, ma'am. She smiled, not warmly, but with satisfaction. Good. Some people need to learn that not everyone is available for exploitation. Keep doing what you're doing, Major. It's working. It was working. Slowly, incrementally, the professional landscape was shifting. Officers who'd watched Rourke take credit for my work were now watching me maintain boundaries while continuing to produce excellent results. The contrast was noticeable. He needed me more than I needed him, and everyone could see it. But there was no satisfaction in it, no sense of victory. Just exhaustion from maintaining constant vigilance, from parsing every interaction for hidden agendas, from living in a professional environment where trust had been replaced by transaction. Late one night, sitting in my quarters with a glass of wine and too many thoughts, I pulled up the email chain from Rourke. 5 messages now, each one a variation on the same theme. Let's reconnect, let's collaborate, let's move past this. I drafted a response I'd never send. Sir, you didn't just take credit for my work. You taught me that the institution I served valued appearance over substance, politics over expertise, and convenience over justice. You can't undo that with coffee and conversation. You broke something that can't be fixed with better communication. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you entirely. You operated within a system that rewarded your behavior. But I will never trust you again, and I will never give you another opportunity to exploit my work. That's not a miscommunication. That's a consequence. Respectfully, Alex, I deleted the draft and closed my laptop. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. They just needed to be lived. The ghost contact would continue, probably for months, until he found someone else to exploit or until I rotated to a new assignment. But I was done letting it disturb my peace. He could hover, could reach out, could try to rebuild bridges I'd burned deliberately. I'd stay polite, civil, clear, and completely, irrevocably unavailable. The shift started with a mission failure that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with Rourke. 3 months after I'd established my boundaries, a joint exercise went catastrophically wrong. Not casualties level wrong, no one died, thank God, but wrong enough that senior leadership started asking hard questions about planning and oversight. The exercise had used the coordination doctrine Rourke had presented as his own, but the implementation had failed at multiple critical points. I heard about it through Mercer, who'd been observing the exercise from the operations center. The doctrine worked fine, he said. But they didn't follow the implementation protocols. Someone made modifications without understanding the underlying logic. Who approved the modifications? 3 guesses. Of course. Rourke had authorized changes to my doctrine without consulting the person who'd built it, without understanding why certain protocols existed, and the result was a clustered mess that left 4 different service branches pointing fingers at each other. The investigation was quiet but thorough. I wasn't directly involved. I'd been on a different assignment that week, but my name came up repeatedly because people kept asking why the doctrine's architect hadn't been consulted about the modifications. That question, asked in enough rooms by enough senior officers, started revealing the truth. Colonel Voss called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. Major Dawson, I need you to answer something honestly. Did you develop the multi-domain coordination doctrine currently in use across joint operations? Yes, ma'am. Working with a team of specialists, but yes, the framework and implementation protocols were primarily my design. Why isn't your name on any of the official documentation? You'd have to ask Lieutenant Colonel Rourke, ma'am. She leaned back in her chair. I'm asking you. I chose my words carefully. The work was developed while I was under his command. The decision about attribution was his to make. That's a diplomatic answer, Major. Give me an honest one. Ma'am. He reassigned credit for work I developed. When I tried to establish boundaries to prevent further exploitation, he attempted to pressure me into continued collaboration without attribution. I've maintained professional standards throughout, but I've also maintained boundaries. Why didn't you file a formal complaint? Because complaints require evidence of regulation violations, ma'am. What he did was unethical, but not technically illegal. And filing complaints against superior officers rarely benefits the complainant's career. She nodded slowly. You're right. It doesn't. But here's what's going to happen now. The investigation into the exercise failure is going to require detailed testimony about the doctrine's development and intended implementation. You're going to be asked to provide that testimony. When you do, you're going to tell the truth. All of it. Understood? Yes, ma'am. The testimony took place over 3 days in a secure conference room with 2 colonels, a Navy captain, and a representative from the Inspector General's office. They asked detailed questions about development timelines, decision rationales, implementation protocols, and modification approval processes. I answered everything honestly. I provided documentation, Emails, draft versions with my metadata, meeting notes, technical specifications I'd personally authored. I explained the logic behind each component of the doctrine and why certain modifications would compromise its effectiveness. I also explained, when asked directly, that I hadn't been consulted about the modifications approved by Lieutenant Colonel Rourke despite being the doctrine's primary architect. The questioning officer, a colonel named Martinez, looked up from his notes. Major, to be clear, you developed this doctrine, Lieutenant Colonel Rourke received credit for it, and when modifications were proposed, no one consulted you because no one knew you developed it? That's correct, sir. How did that situation occur? Lieutenant Colonel Rourke assumed credit when the doctrine was formally implemented. I maintained professional standards, but did not publicly contest the attribution. Why not? Because contesting it would have required filing complaints against a superior officer, which typically damages the complainant's career more than it corrects the attribution error. I made a calculated decision to maintain boundaries while continuing to do good work. Martinez nodded. Thank you for your honesty, Major. That's all we need for now. 2 weeks later, the investigation's findings were released through official channels. The exercise failure was attributed to unauthorized modifications of established doctrine, specifically citing failure to consult subject matter experts during the modification approval process. The report didn't explicitly name Rourke, but anyone reading it would understand exactly what had happened. More significantly, the report recommended that future doctrine development include formal attribution protocols and mandatory consultation with original developers before modifications could be approved. The day the report was released, I received an email from the task group commander I'd worked with months earlier, the Marine colonel who'd recognized my expertise. Subject line: Opportunity. Major Dawson, given your demonstrated expertise in joint operations coordination and your authorship of the current doctrine, I'd like to discuss a permanent position with our task group. This would be a joint assignment with excellent advancement potential. Details below. Interested? I read it 3 times, processing the implications. A permanent position outside Rourke's command structure. Recognition of my actual contributions. Advancement potential based on demonstrated expertise rather than political maneuvering. I replied within an hour. Sir, very interested. Happy to discuss details at your convenience. The next day, Rourke appeared at my office door. Not ghost contact this time, direct confrontation, though his expression was carefully controlled. Major Dawson, do you have a moment? Yes, sir. He closed the door behind him, which immediately put me on alert. Closed-door conversations with superior officers could go anywhere. I wanted to discuss the recent investigation findings. Sir, I provided testimony as required. Everything I said was factual and documented. I'm not disputing that. I'm trying to understand why you chose to be so detailed in your responses. I met his eyes. Sir, I was asked direct questions under oath. I answered them honestly. That's my obligation. You could have been more circumspect. No, sir, I couldn't. I was specifically instructed to provide complete and accurate information. That's what I did. His jaw tightened. You've made your point, Major. I understand you're upset about the attribution situation, but this didn't need to become an official matter. Sir, with respect, I didn't make it an official matter. The exercise failure made it an official matter. The investigation made it an official matter. I simply answered questions truthfully when asked. You're enjoying this. No, sir, I'm not. There's no satisfaction in watching someone's career suffer consequences, even when those consequences are deserved. I'm just done protecting you from the results of your own choices. He stood there for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not quite acceptance, but recognition that this conversation would go nowhere useful for him. I see. Well, I won't take up any more of your time, Major. He left, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, Mercer called. Ma'am, heard you're being considered for the Joint Task Group position. News travels fast. It does when it's good news. You deserve this. Thanks, Ryan. For what it's worth, people are talking about what really happened with the doctrine, about the investigation, about how you handled everything. You've got a lot of respect right now. Respect. The word felt strange after months of feeling invisible. But maybe that was the transformation, not dramatic vindication, not public victory, just quiet recognition that competence and integrity eventually mattered, even in systems designed to obscure both. I accepted the task group position 3 weeks later. The transfer orders came through faster than usual, probably because senior leadership wanted to demonstrate that good officers who got sidelined could find better opportunities elsewhere. My last day under Rourke's command, he didn't say goodbye. Just sent a brief email. Best of luck in your new assignment. I didn't reply. Some conversations didn't need closure. Some people didn't deserve the energy required for final words. I packed my office in 2 hours. Files, photos, commendations, the small accumulation of professional life that fit into cardboard boxes. The shadow box with my medals stayed on the wall until last, and when I finally took it down, I felt something release in my chest. Not relief exactly, but space. Room to breathe without constant vigilance, without parsing every interaction for exploitation. Colonel Voss found me carrying boxes to my car. Major Dawson. Moment. Yes, ma'am. You did good work here, despite everything. Don't let Rourke's behavior make you forget that. I won't, ma'am. And Major? The next time someone tries to take credit for your work, don't wait 2 years to set boundaries. Do it immediately. You're too competent to let politics sideline you. Understood, ma'am. She helped me load the last box, then stepped back and saluted. I returned it, feeling the weight of military courtesy that usually felt routine but today carried something more, acknowledgement, maybe, or respect that had finally caught up to reality. I drove off base as the sun set, watching the airfield lights come on in the gathering dusk. Aircraft were landing, the same training missions we'd run for years, the same operations my doctrine would guide for years to come. The tables hadn't completely turned. Rourke still had his rank, still had his position, still had a career. But he'd lost something more important, the ability to exploit my work without consequence. And I'd gained something I'd thought was lost, the understanding that my expertise had value independent of who got credit for it. It wasn't justice, not really. Justice would have been proper attribution from the start, advancement based on merit, recognition without having to fight for it. But it was transformation, from trying to fit into spaces that pushed me out to building spaces where my experience naturally mattered. From chasing institutional validation to establishing value on my own terms. And that I was learning might be enough. The Joint Task Group assignment was everything the previous command wasn't: focused, merit-based, exhausting in productive ways rather than demoralizing ones. I worked 16-hour days coordinating operations across 5 services and 3 allied nations, refining doctrine based on operational feedback, solving problems that actually mattered. My inbox filled with requests for consultation from officers who valued expertise over politics. 6 months into the assignment, I made major below the zone, selected for promotion ahead of my peer group, which almost never happened unless someone's performance was exceptional. The promotion board comments specifically cited innovative doctrine development, expert coordination of joint operations, and consistent demonstration of leadership excellence under challenging circumstances. I read the citation 3 times, looking for qualification or hedging. Found none. Just recognition, clean and unambiguous. The promotion ceremony was small, just the task group commander, a few colleagues, and Mercer, who'd driven 3 hours to attend. The Marine colonel who'd recruited me pinned on my new rank insignia. Major Dawson, he said formally, then grinned. Or should I say, Lieutenant Colonel Select. You've earned this about 5 times over. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that crying in uniform was complicated, but my throat tightened. Thank you, sir. Afterward, Mercer pulled me aside. Ma'am, you know the whole base is talking about this, right? About how you got promoted after transferring away from Rourke's command. People are connecting dots. That's not why I transferred. I know. But the optics matter. You set boundaries, refused to be exploited, found a better opportunity, and immediately excelled. That's a story people pay attention to. He was right. Over the next few weeks, I received emails from officers I'd never met, mostly women, mostly mid-grade, all asking variations of the same question. How did you stand up to a superior officer without destroying your career? I answered each one honestly. I explained that standing up hadn't been a single dramatic moment, but a series of small boundaries maintained consistently. I explained that I'd gotten lucky with timing, with having Colonel Voss as an ally, with the investigation revealing truth I hadn't needed to fight for. I explained that it could have gone differently, that I'd been prepared for my career to stall permanently. But mostly I explained that the alternative, continuing to be exploited while watching my work get stolen, had felt worse than career stagnation. That maintaining integrity sometimes meant accepting professional consequences. That boundaries were worth the cost, even when the cost was high. One email stood out. From a Navy lieutenant named Sarah Chin, stationed at a base I'd never visited. Ma'am, I've been in a similar situation for 8 months. My department head has been presenting my analysis as his own, and when I tried to address it, he implied I was being difficult. Reading about your experience helped me realize I'm not crazy for wanting credit for my work. I just wanted to say, thank you. I replied, Lieutenant Chin, you're not crazy. You're experiencing exploitation, and it's valid to want recognition for your work. Document everything, maintain professional boundaries, and remember that your expertise has value independent of who acknowledges it. If you need to discuss specifics, I'm available. She never took me up on the offer, but 3 months later I heard she'd transferred to a different command and received an early promotion. Small victory, maybe, but victories counted, even small ones. The Navy Bar incident happened during a coordination conference at NAS North Island, 8 months after I'd left Rourke's command. I'd been invited to present doctrine updates to a joint audience, my name on the agenda, my expertise formally recognized. The conference ended at 17:30, and I went to the tailhook to decompress before flying back the next morning. I chose the corner booth out of habit, ordered a beer, and tried to stop thinking about work for 90 minutes. That's when Lieutenant Keller kicked my chair and told me the booth was for legends only. That's when everything came full circle. The betrayal, the boundaries, the transformation, all compressed into a single moment where a young officer who'd grown up hearing stories about Valkyrie 6 didn't recognize her sitting right in front of him. I pointed to my name carved in the beam above us. Watched his face change as recognition hit. Felt the room's energy shift as people realized who I was. But I didn't feel vindicated. Just tired. Tired of being made invisible by systems that should have valued me. Tired of having to prove expertise that should have been obvious. Tired of the constant vigilance required to protect my work from exploitation. Ma'am, Keller started going pale. I shook my head. It's fine. You didn't know. I should have known. I mean, I've studied your missions. I wrote a paper on the Horizon extraction. You wrote about sanitized after-action reports. You don't know what actually happened. His friends were gathering now, looking uncomfortable. One of them, the LTJG I'd noticed earlier, a woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Junior Grade Mara Vance. I've studied your coordination doctrine. It's required reading at the academy now. Required reading, I repeated. Under whose name? She hesitated. The documentation says it was developed by a joint operations team led by Lieutenant Colonel Rourke. There it was. Even after the investigation, even after the truth came out, the official documentation still credited Rourke. The system had acknowledged error internally, but hadn't corrected the public record. My name remained absent from the work I'd built. That documentation is incomplete, I said carefully. But it doesn't matter now. The doctrine works. That's what's important. Keller was still staring at the carved name. Valkyrie 6. You kept 6 aircraft in the air through impossible conditions. Everyone knows that story. Everyone knows a story, I corrected. Most people don't know the person. Can I buy you a drink, ma'am? To apologize for, no need. But I'll tell you what you can do. When you're in a position to credit someone's work, make sure their name is on it. Don't let politics erase contributions. And when you see someone being sidelined despite excellent performance, pay attention to why. The military runs on expertise and integrity, not on who claims credit loudest. He nodded, looking younger suddenly. Yes, ma'am. I gestured to the booth. Now sit. Your friends are waiting. Learn something about humility. They sat, subdued now, the bravado from earlier completely gone. I stayed for another hour, answering questions about operations and leadership, watching these junior officers absorb lessons about respect and recognition that they'd need years from now when they face similar choices. Mercer arrived near the end, sliding into the booth beside me. Heard you had an encounter with some overconfident JOs. Word travels fast. Always does when Valkyrie 6 shows up somewhere. He grinned. You going to make this a regular thing? Appearing at bars to educate the youth. God, I hope not. But sitting there, watching young officers who'd learned something about the distance between legends and the people behind them, I felt something shift one final time. Not healing. Some wounds don't heal completely. But acceptance, maybe. Understanding that the institution's failures didn't negate the work's value. That my expertise existed independent of who received credit. That respect, real respect, eventually finds its way to the people who've earned it. The carved name above the booth would outlast Rourke's career, would outlast the political maneuvering and bureaucratic erasure. It would remain there, silent testimony to a mission where the math worked and everyone came home. That night, walking back to base housing under stars obscured by marine layer, I thought about legacy. Not the institutional kind, not promotion packets and official documentation, but the real kind. The lives touched, the missions shaped, the quiet moments when truth reasserted itself despite systems designed to obscure it. I'd given 15 years to the Air Force. Lost relationships, missed birthdays, sacrificed certainty for service. Had my contributions stolen, my advancement blocked, my expertise exploited. But I'd also learned something essential, that integrity wasn't maintained by external validation, that boundaries could be held even under pressure. That expertise had value independent of recognition. The institution hadn't validated me the way I'd hoped. But I'd validated myself, through work that endured, through boundaries that held, through transformation that happened incrementally and irreversibly. Power, boundaries, and justice didn't always roar. Sometimes they sat calmly in a booth, letting others discover truth on their own. Sometimes they drove back to base housing at 2200 hours, tired but whole, carrying scars that taught more than victories ever could. I wasn't Valkyrie 6 because a beam said so. I was Valkyrie 6 because 6 aircraft came home, because doctrine worked, because expertise mattered whether or not anyone acknowledged it. 25 years later, I'm a brigadier general sitting in the same corner booth at the tailhook, and the carved name above me has weathered to barely legible scratches in wood that's been refinished twice. I'm 61 now, 3 years from mandatory retirement, and I've stopped counting the bases I've served at, the missions I've coordinated, the officers I've mentored through situations that echo my own. The bar looks different. New ownership, updated lighting, craft beer instead of domestic bottles, but the booth remains. Someone had the sense to preserve it during renovations, recognizing that history mattered even when the people who made it faded into background noise. I'm here for a change of command ceremony at North Island, watching the next generation take positions I once held, implementing doctrine I helped refine over decades. My star sits heavy on my shoulder, a rank I never imagined reaching after those years under Rourke's command. The promotion to lieutenant colonel came through despite him. Full colonel followed because the work spoke louder than politics. And brigadier general happened because at some point, enough senior officers remembered who actually built the systems they relied on. The door opens and a group enters, mixed services, mostly captains and majors, the confident stride of people who've proven themselves but haven't been broken yet. One of them, an Air Force major with pilot wings and a face that suggests late 30s, stops mid-conversation and stares at the booth. She walks over slowly, and I see her reading what's left of the carved names. Her finger traces the barely visible letters of Valkyrie 6. General Dawson, she says, and her voice carries something between awe and disbelief. I look up from my phone. Major. Ma'am, I'm Major Nicole Reeves. I wrote my thesis on your multi-domain coordination framework. It's still the foundational doctrine for joint operations. I know, I say and smile. I read it. You propose some interesting modifications. Her eyes widen. You read my thesis? I read everything published about the doctrine. Occupational hazard. She gestures to the booth, asking permission without words. I nod, and she sits across from me, her friends hovering nearby, but keeping respectful distance. Ma'am, can I ask you something? The original documentation credited Lieutenant Colonel Rourke as primary architect. But every operator I've talked to says you developed it. What happened? 25 years ago, I would have deflected that question, would have stayed diplomatic, would have protected institutional reputation over personal truth. But I'm 61, 3 years from retirement, and I've stopped protecting people who never protected me. Rourke took credit for work I developed. I say simply. It took years for the record to be corrected, and even then, not completely. The official documentation still doesn't tell the whole story. She stops processing. That's not right. No, it's not. But it happened. And I learned something important. You can't control whether institutions recognize your work, but you can control whether you keep doing good work regardless. The doctrine succeeded because it was sound, not because of who got credit. But you should have been credited.
Yes.
But should have doesn't change reality. What changed reality was maintaining boundaries, refusing to be exploited further, and finding opportunities where my expertise was actually valued. I pause. And documenting everything. Always document everything. She nods slowly, and I see something click in her expression, recognition of her own situation, maybe, or fear that she'll face similar circumstances. Ma'am, what happened to Rourke? I sip my water. He made full colonel, retired at 25 years. Never made general. The investigation findings followed him, quietly but persistently. He had a perfectly adequate career, just not the exceptional one he thought he was building on my work. Good, she says with surprising vehemence. Maybe. But here's what I learned. His career trajectory mattered less than I thought it would. I spent years angry about the injustice, and that anger was valid. But eventually I realized that my energy was better spent doing good work than monitoring whether he faced consequences. Her friends have moved closer now, listening. One of them, a Navy lieutenant commander, speaks up. General, they tell your story at the academy now. About setting boundaries with superior officers. It's taught as a case study in professional ethics. I didn't know that. The information lands with unexpected weight, not vindication exactly, but acknowledgement that the struggle meant something beyond my individual experience. What do they teach? I ask. That integrity sometimes requires accepting career risk. That documentation matters. That expertise has value independent of recognition. That systems can fail good people, and those people have to decide whether to adapt or exit. I never exited. I say quietly. No, ma'am. You transformed the system from inside. That's the remarkable part. I look at these younger officers, mid-30s, where I was when everything fell apart, and see the same determination I once carried, the same belief that merit would be enough.
I want to warn them it won't be.
Want to prepare them for the betrayals coming. But I also see their hope, and I remember how much I needed that hope even when it proved insufficient. The system still fails good people, I tell them. I've watched it happen to dozens of officers over the years. I've intervened when I could, advocated where I had influence, mentored people through situations similar to mine. But I couldn't fix the structural problems. No single person can. What I could do was demonstrate that surviving institutional betrayal was possible. That good work endures even when credit gets stolen. That boundaries can be maintained without destroying your career, though it might feel that way while it's happening. Major Reeves leans forward. Ma'am, would you do it again? Knowing what you know now. I consider the question seriously. The lost years, the stolen credit, the exhaustion of constant vigilance. But also the work that mattered, the people I helped, the doctrine that saved lives across 2 decades of operations. Yes, I say finally. Because the alternative was becoming someone who accepted exploitation as normal. And I couldn't live with that person. They sit with that answer, processing it against their own choices, their own compromises, their own boundaries they're learning to establish. I stand up, preparing to leave for the evening ceremony. Major Reeves, keep writing. Your modifications to the doctrine are sound. Submit them through proper channels, make sure your name is on them, and don't let anyone convince you that credit doesn't matter. It does. Yes, ma'am. I look at all of them one last time. And when you're senior enough to make these decisions yourselves, when someone brings you excellent work and you have the power to credit it properly, remember this conversation. Remember what it felt like to wonder if your contributions would be erased. Then make different choices than the people who failed us. They nod, serious now, understanding the responsibility I'm placing on them. I leave the bar as the sun sets over the Pacific, casting long shadows across the airfield where aircraft are landing from training missions that use doctrine I built decades ago. The star on my shoulder catches light, symbol of rank I earned despite systems designed to prevent it. Valkyrie 6. The name barely visible in wood above a corner booth, but carved deeper in the memories of people who learned from missions where everyone came home. That's legacy. Not the rank, not the documentation, not even the justice that came slowly and incompletely. Just the work. Just the truth. Just the quiet insistence that expertise and integrity matter, even when institutions forget. I've carried that insistence for 25 years. In 3 more years, someone else will carry it forward. And the work will endure. That's how it all unfolded. A quiet reminder that your worth doesn't disappear just because someone fails to see it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone underestimate you until they finally realized who you were? Have you ever walked away from a system, workplace, or a relationship that stopped respecting you? Drop your story in the comments. Someone else might need to hear it. And if this resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a nudge to stand up for themselves. Your voice matters more than you think.